I've been here for the better part of a year, alone. The remains of my brief companions, the soldiers, Lawson, Garcia, Diaz, Markov, Bellinger, Worthington, and finally, Dr. Robertson through his notes. The men I'd come to know when they came for Robertson's records. Something that could drive back the undead, once and for all. Vaccinate with the RG1 treatment, enough to stop someone from turning, resulting in Bellinger and Markov turning into intelligent and even more dangerous undead before the RG2A was given. The RG1 saved my life after the tactical bomb was launched, the weapon blasted, destroying most biomatter and causing the soldiers to rise from the dead. They all still drew close to the encampment where they had died from the impact. The infection caused their bodies to endure. Even with their bodies changed, I could still recognize and guide them. The undead, a majority, ended up perishing, only for the site to draw more of their kind throughout the land. Car parks with rotted and rusty cars, through once busy streets, and inside abandoned buildings. I could never work out what they were searching for. Their empty cries echoed out, and there were no living people to hear them. Their radiated flesh clung from their bodies, and their bottom jaws had long fallen off. Their wanderings were limited to the area close to their old encampment, and soon, those sparse in number fell apart. Even in death, determined to protect their target, their bodies were nothing but ash, with their heads still moving, and open mouths reaching for life that no longer roamed. I don't think there was anything living here. Since I was lonely, I took tokens from their clothing, or mementos from them. While they still recognized me, I would take them into a shed that was their makeshift bedroom to give them a routine, feeding them small, mutated rodents that I'd managed to catch, and slowly, they turned into mindless, drawling beasts, leaving me with a feeling of lingering, relentless loneliness. I miss their whispering, even the malicious ones, yet soon, those were just like the others, silent, blurring into a monotonous similarity. I remembered being thrust on the ground with, I can't remember who it was, protecting me. The impact blasted my ears and my eyes, only with the silence of the dead, and when I woke up, the world was different. Any whispers from them no longer filled the void, and for the first time, I longed to hear them. I kept the briefcase with the cure and other documents safe during this time, waiting for someone to come and collect it. Using a long set of handcuffs to keep it secured, it had cut into my skin, leaving an open slit that didn't bleed and nor did it heal. The pain was complicated. Occasionally, I could feel my skin being pierced and pulled, then followed by a slow ache. Then, nothing. I'd regularly have to check my body to ensure nothing was damaged or about to fall off. Around the borders of the toxic land, I'd see small groups of people wearing camo, the same gear as the other soldiers, and later, people heavily covered in protective gear, only to retreat quickly. Staring through binoculars, I'd see them get close, hungry for the wealth or knowledge that still lingered here. Or perhaps, did they know about Dr. Robertson's research? I used to see birds and the occasional rodent roaming about. Now, they avoided this place, with only a few born here developing large cysts before perishing after short, pain-riddled lives. I saw one, a pregnant rat with a bulging belly, and she gave birth to twisting, undead baby rodents who began devouring their unfortunate mother. Unwilling to prevent it from spreading, I slammed my heel down, completely crushing them and ignoring their twisted cries for help. In my journal, I scribbled drawings of my daily life, hoping that someone living would find me one day. Worthington's advice still repeated in my mind, on repeat. Good luck. Keep it safe for our regiment to come and clean the place up. Give the documents to them. Give the documents to them. Give the documents to them. The equipment had survived. Dr. Robertson's notes still remained intact, though now highly irradiated. The Geiger counter's noise became rapid when I hovered the machine over it, going to critical levels, repeatedly striking red with the arrow. I knew the machinery would eventually run down over time. I go between the treehouse that had been my home, the oversized mansion, a place that had been owned by the wealthiest family in town, and had become my secondary, and finally, the outpost where we waited while the bomb dropped. I'd sit on the ground, listening to a broken television playing on repeat. The long beep demonstrated a lack of signal, yet it was reassuring, knowing there was still power somewhere. The static image would flicker, and one time I was sure I saw a woman in a room talking. That meant that people were still alive. I began imagining people around me, heading to the local diner, going home after a long day at work, and a general routine. Over time, the atmosphere changed. I couldn't see the stars anymore, their shine concealed by a thick mass of black clouds. No longer would the undead gaze into the stars, the world now unknown to them. The rain was black and sizzled when it touched the undead, who seemed immune. I wouldn't hesitate to walk through it. While it didn't hurt me, it burned, and I knew it wasn't wise. Any clothing I wore out in it soon disintegrated, leaving patches of exposed skin. When the dead wandered past, I still spoke to them. At first, they recognized me and would shamble toward me, unsure why, yet now, they walked right past me. Occasionally a stray animal would enter, unable to get away, only for the undead to show no interest in them, and the animal, unfortunately for it, would perish before starvation would strangle it of life. I wondered if another bright light would come from the sky and finish us off. None came, leaving us to linger in this unholy purgatory. When I walked to the far eastern side, I occasionally heard faint radio transmissions echoing through the land. They cracked with the static of long-dead voices, each one gripped in pain as the world fell around them. I couldn't tell exactly how old these messages were, forever stuck on a loop.
The infection has reached Bridgeport. Don't go out at night. Be sure to isolate any infected, and euthanasia is permitted by law. People are advised to go to safe zones. Stay off the roads.
I fear for us. Please. I don't know what we're going to do. I think this is our end, folks. There's nothing more we can do.
Martial law has been declared. Looters and deserters are to be shot on sight.
The time has come, folks. Grab your guns and get ready for survival. There is no law. Nothing. We need to kill them all, or we will all die.
So, folks, this is signing off. Looks like everything has failed. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. We never found the answers, and the cure... it failed. I hope that your final days are spent well.
The world was gone, replaced by old radio signals and the unyielding groans of the undead. It all fizzled out into static, with traces of voices coming through. And finally, nothing but silence. I kept coming back weeks later, hoping it would be fixed, and each day I was left waiting. The perpetual silence loomed. I wished I could hear something. Even the shuffling and groans of the undead became fewer. If only the radio worked, and I was physically able. I could have told them I had a cure. All they needed to do was come collect it. Soon, these remnants of the past became fewer, until they ceased to be. Time was no longer a factor, and I found I no longer needed to eat. However, I'd sit in one of the decaying houses, listening to the sound of acidic rain outside, with an empty plate in front of me. Every drop of water added a sizzle to the outside. Still, I'd sit inside at the kitchen table, with utensils neatly on one side, and a teddy bear in front of the other. It had a plate of its own. I'd pretend to serve it invisible food, gesturing with my hands to see if it wanted more. And we were halfway through our dinner, when I heard footsteps down the main road. I ignored it. Perhaps my mind had finally lost grip on reality. I stood, walked over to the broken glass window, and peered out. There were a trio of people, and blinking, I rubbed my eyes to confirm that they were, in fact, real. Fortunately, they weren't figments of a broken imagination. They continued to run down the damaged, uneven pavement through the main street, and wore bright yellow protective suits. They carried rifles in their hands and killed any zombie that stood in their way. Sensing that fresh meat was available, the zombies shambled towards them. And it was the first time I saw them actively hunt. I don't know how long it had been. Fortunately, they weren't intelligent like they had been, nor capable of speech. I wanted to call out to them, but without my tongue, it was hopeless. And seeing how I resembled the undead, I figured they would shoot me on sight. Were these the people I was waiting for? Their voices muffled through the gas masks.
Quick, we can't wait here. We're already short on time.
When we get it, it will be worthwhile.
The one at the back didn't speak. Instead, gestured with a forward hand movement to push them to go on. The previous two were more erratic, but the one at the rear was steady, assured. It was strange to hear voices, living ones rather than recordings. They headed toward the old encampment and ran along the outskirts of town. I was going to wave goodbye to the teddy bear, but I took the briefcase and one of the old handguns with me, stolen from Garcia's body, and trailed behind them, ensuring I wasn't seen. The undead usually ignored me, but now they tried to push past or through me in order to reach their target. I held the briefcase by the handle, allowing the chain to dangle down, and headed toward them. I trailed behind, allowing the undead to push past me and acting as cover in case they fired. They opened up the old tents, rummaged around, and started touching the tech, removing the hard drives. The old barrier, limited though it was, protected them from the zombies, who gradually approached and wandered away, leaving them to their task.
Dr. Worthington's work was received by the secondary team. It's supposed to be in a briefcase.
She looked around, finding many pieces of equipment had been damaged, mostly the old radio equipment first damaged by the blast, and the natural decay of time. Plants had grown over the pieces before dying, and becoming food for a neon green fungi that too perished.
We can't be out here too long.
We scan, upload, and get out.
The commander spoke.
I wish we could take more of this with us.
He stared out at the broken town.
Have you ever been on a mission that was so quiet?
The machine beeped several times, causing him to freeze and stare down at it.
Focus on your work.
He insisted, standing guard with his rifle ready and scanning the horizon for any threats. For the moment, the undead were distracted by the damaged beacons, depleted in power, enough to keep them at bay.
Yes, sir.
The scientist replied after a pause. I wanted to know whether to approach them or not, keeping an eye on them at a distance. My body was concealed by pieces of wreckage. I was scared, but I made a promise many years ago to ensure it was delivered. Watching them while they started to stumble and feel the effect of the radiation. Or perhaps they had been on the road for a considerable amount of time. I made a low grunting sound, only for them to spin around and aim their guns in my direction. I held up the briefcase, waving my free hand, and smiled at them before pointing at it. I needed them to know I wasn't one of the undead. I walked warily. Despite their hostility, I was happy to be around people, hoping they would listen rather than open fire on me. They looked at each other.
Sir? Sir!
Sir, what do...
Fucking hell.
There were no identifying markings on the yellow radiation suit. No badge nor branch number, state symbol, or national flag. I noticed an oxygen tank on their backs, but none of them brought extra supplies. Barely enough food and water to escape. However, one was stockier than the others, and I guess he was a soldier of some kind. I gestured for them to lower their rifles, and surprisingly, they did so. I saw my reflection in their visors, and no longer did I have any speculation. It was a fact. I looked like a zombie. My skin was grey, with thick cracks, and my hair had fallen out in clumps, leaving bald, sore-ridden patches. My hands were barren and marked, and my fingernails were missing. The gradual process of decay had gone unnoticed. My mouth opened in surprise, and the dread horror filled me. I moved my head from side to side, studying my face. I suddenly lifted the briefcase and held it out to them, which caused them to jump.
Sir, what is she?
A male voice spluttered.
She could be the one Lawson mentioned before they went dark. How is she still alive?
We can't take her with us. Get the briefcase.
His cold, methodical tone scared me, and the two approached. He held a knife in his hand, and I knew what they wanted. I screamed with only a garbled sound responding, pointing frantically toward the treehouse, hoping they would let me find the key, and neither bothered to listen. I struggled while they held me down, face first in the radiated grass, wanting to run and felt a cold bite. Suddenly, the briefcase was no longer attached to me. I screamed, a dread rasping sound, and once they released me, I rested on my knees. My blood was black and thick, and I put my hand over it, squeezing desperately to prevent the blood loss.
Put it out of its misery.
The dismissive order came, and the briefcase was opened with a pocket knife. The small lock popped open, and documents, updated vaccine, and a chip were inside. They hesitated to kill me, and through the mask, I could see a full-on look of pity, even remorse for what they had to do.
Sir, I think she is...
Her eyes peered through the blood-soaked visor.
Take her blood and brain matter. Put it in the device. We've been out here too long.
His voice was coarse.
I'm sorry, I don't want to hurt you. Please, stay still.
She put her hands up, trying to show me she wasn't a threat. Lying to me. Shaking my head, I tried to warn them without words, putting up my arms in surrender and defense, cautioning them about getting too close. I struck out with my stump, yet my muscles, having wasted away, were no match for them. I didn't want to injure them, and soon I was pinned. Again. My face on the rotting dirt, an animalistic hollowed sound echoing from my throat as I screamed at the indignity. A large syringe drew out my blood, watching it get drawn up. They were taking too much, leaving me exhausted, weak. I jerked my arm, roughly causing the glass to break. It pierced her suit, penetrating her skin, and her blood spilled out, mingling with my own. The commander aimed his rifle at me, but still, he hesitated and waited while she and the other scientist tried to prevent the bleeding.
We need to patch up her suit. Sir, what do we do? Sir?
He demanded, his hands trying to keep the slit closed.
We're going to need to get back to the base as soon as possible to treat this. The exposure will...
He yelled when he was pricked with my blood, screaming and stopping to grip his hand to stop it from spreading. They jerked, coughing, too distracted with their own doom. Fortunately for me, their focus elsewhere, and I could slink away to hide behind damaged cars, while the commander's rifle moved to point in their direction. The pair started coughing mildly before it descended into hoarse barks. The one in command ignored them and took out a device, connecting it with a cord, and a couple of beeps told me whatever information was being uploaded. He opened the folders, taking photographs of every single piece of document, turning them over to get copies of both sides. Briefly, I saw a picture of Dr. Robertson, some of the early infected, and the notes concerning the intelligent zombies. He wiped some of the updated vaccine on a slide, allowing it too to upload, only for a distinct, loud beep. A system failure. He smacked the device, swearing under his breath. Their rasping cough became a hacking one, and blood splatters appeared on their visors, red and fresh.
What's happening?
Sir, what's happening to us?
He didn't respond to them, carrying out his task before he halted. I thought he was going to assist his fellows. I looked out, trying to find the best way to escape where I wouldn't be gunned down. I stared in shock. Infection? Radiation? I'm not sure which it was. Their bodies rocked, tensely twisted, and their hands raised in unnatural, coarse movements. He held the rifle at them, firing the gun, shooting 10 bullets into their chests, one after another. Their bodies jerked and they fell down dead. I waited, staring at them, waiting for what would come. Shuffling on my knees to move behind him, abandoning my discarded hand, and watch while he aimed the rifle at me. A long, hissing moan went through the mic, and my attached hand pointed harshly at them.
What the fuck?
This time, he shot them in the head. Fragments of plastic, bone, and brain matter blew into the air. His time in an undead world paid off, and he went back to scanning the notes stoically, unbothered by what happened. Their bodies were limp, yet something lingered inside. I crawled on one hand and my knees, staring at the broken remains of the woman's face. An eye in one place with exposed brain matter. The oxygen tank wheezed with the remnants escaping. I turned the gauge on it, figuring I could use it as a weapon. I closed my eyes when I heard that dreaded and far too familiar sound. I closed my eyes and saw one chewing on my severed hand, crunching a finger and pulling it away from the knuckle. The other scientist crawled over, eagerly pulling on the thumb and twisting it right off.
How?
He whispered, finally sounding out of his element. With smug satisfaction, I took his arm and pointed in the direction of the town frantically and silently, not wanting to lure their attention back to us. I don't know which one of us made the sound. A rock moving disturbed them, and the pair gave us a knowing, hungry look with their remaining eye, and shook the remains of their necks at us. Thus far, the undead had mostly left us alone. I didn't wait to see if they would start speaking to us, for I knew they had to be something else. Something far more dangerous. I took his elbow, and together, we ran toward the town. The undead left me alone. They approached him with outstretched hands, and now, they no longer felt like a threat. I knew every single building in town, inside and out. I knew the perfect location, since the undead never traveled below. We, or he, would be safe. I gestured to him, and to my surprise, he complied when we ran to a manhole, opening the lid while the undead circled us. He followed, 2 steps behind me, and I had no choice but to accept it. We came to a grey door with "Maintenance" written in faded red paint, and I opened the door, listened for a moment, and gestured with my stump for him to enter. The bleeding had stopped. It tingled occasionally, and he entered, always keeping an eye on me, turning his back to the door frame and using the light on his weapon to shine into the room. After inspecting it, he made his way inside while I closed the door. In the dark, I blinked a couple of times, my intact hand taut, and I resisted the urge to scratch my eye. It was torture. I couldn't risk pushing debris into it that could impact my vision. Opening a metal drawer, I took out a piece of cloth and wiped the grime from my eyes. I knew we still needed to move, but what puzzled me was how nonchalant he was. The process had made more noise than was necessary. He leaned on the wall, wrapped his arms around his body, and bent over. Watching him, I wondered why. My severed wrist barely hurt now. I lifted it up before wrapping it up, and noticed he was watching me once I was done. He had sad grey eyes through the fogged-up visor, and slowly slumped to the floor. I pointed to the door leading further into the tunnels, hoping he would understand, and it would take us time to get there. He shook his head. If only I had a piece of paper and a pen to write, or my damn tongue to where I could speak. Perhaps he was worried? I pointed, then mimicked a zombie's snarling face and shook my head, hoping he wouldn't think there was a horde of the undead waiting down there for him.
No, it's no use.
The commander paused, offering up an appreciative, yet sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. He unclasped the strap of his helmet. The material already had a rough and damaged surface. I shook my head wildly, knowing it wasn't safe for him, and rushed over to hold it down. He pushed me back, checked a meter on his device, sighed, and gently moved me away. I moved the residue between my thumb and forefinger, and it was dark and mixed with a coarse plastic material and something else. I lifted it to my nostrils to smell it, then wiped it off with some stray pieces of paper. I noticed he was staring at me, seemingly in concern.
Fuck. Only half was sent through.
He slumped in defeat. There was still a chance, but retrieval of the items and data would take time.
I need to get to the radio tower. Do you know where it is?
I nodded eagerly. I held up my stump while mimicking a missile flying into it, followed by a large explosion. My free hand's fingers flared wide to demonstrate. The impact had destroyed half of it, causing radio frequencies to have difficulties, which is why I had to go to the very edge of town. He let out a dismissive scoff, smirked, and his limbs went limp, relaxing while he closed his eyes to gain a moment of peace in the chaos. After barely a second, he let out a loud, coarse laugh that shook his entire body.
I knew we wouldn't make it back out. There wasn't enough supplies. One way in, transfer the information, and then we were supposed to die here.
He confessed, staring off into nothingness. I wondered what was going through his mind. Regret? A longing for the future? His eyes blinked slowly. Tears pricked at his eyes, and I felt like I was listening to his deathbed confession, and he wished to meet his maker, unburdened by the secret.
I knew. Neither of them knew the truth. I doubted they would have come. So many had already died trying to reach the town. They were told there was a cache of goods here.
I had the feeling his mind wished for the pain to end, yet his body wanted nothing more than survival. I gestured hastily for him to follow me, and to my surprise, he did. We moved down the tunnel. The deeper underground we went, the quieter and safer it was. What I didn't reasonably expect was the wildlife that had survived in the underground world of the town. A small family of rats had made their home, and scurried away when they saw the light and movement. I heard nocturnal birds and bats flying to avoid us, their wings swooping and echoing throughout the tunnel. Perhaps in larger cities with underground metros, people would have survived better. Moving through the long service tunnels until we reached a room, marked with staff only at the door, and it wasn't as faded as the damaged paintwork outside. Opening the door with a creak. There were a couple of old desks on one side, with 2 matching office chairs, all coated in a layer of dust. They acted as a barricade, with dried blood coating them, the corpses having been dragged off a long time ago. There were boxes of old food and medical supplies on the desks. He held a device in his hand. I guessed it served as a many-purpose device, measuring oxygen, toxins, etc. He held it close to his visor, then reaching behind him, and he turned a valve on his oxygen tank and lifted his helmet off with a loud gasp. It was dropped on the ground, momentarily discarded. The stale sweat clinging to his hair told me he had worn this same suit for a considerable amount of time, his skin unable to breathe and discomfort preferred in the case of survival. I figured it must have been safe, or he wouldn't have done it. His hair was cropped back, and now with a better look at him, I could see the sickness that was claiming him. His skin was graying, his eyes had dark bags underneath them, and his cheeks were gaunt. He coughed up black blood, and looked at it feebly in his hand. I reached out to take his helmet, and stared at my reflection again. I could see why they thought I was one of the undead. I no longer resembled a human. I barely felt like one. A small cut on my forehead remained, the wound unchanged, not getting worse yet not healing either.
If only.
He said, checking the signal of the scanner. The battery bar remained steady, while the signal would flicker between reconnecting, sending pieces of data before it would disconnect.
Come on, come on.
The frustrated growl, and his hand tensed, resisting the urge to throw it. I wished I could have asked him about the outside world. How many people were alive? What happened? My memories were scattered. I stood, opened the drawers, and found an old magazine. The products and cheesy smiling faces of the models now felt redundant. I found a piece of paper and a pen with depleted ink, searching through it until finally, finding a pencil, I was able to scribble my thoughts. Since I was a child, when the world changed, I never got a chance to learn how to read or write. Thus, had to rely on my drawing skills. I drew a circle inside the stick figures of us, and the ruins of the town, and using the pencil, I drew an arrow pointing to the outside. I handed it to him with a smile. He stared up at me, wrinkling his nose, and took it in his hand. He stared at the piece of paper. He studied it, looked at me, and scrunched it up with his hand and tossed it aside. My fist clenched, and I had to resist the urge to strike him. I was trying to show him a way out, a way he could survive, perhaps with guilt, or wishing to confess his final moments. He pressed what I'm guessing was a recording device. The button clicked.
Commander Bronson of the Zelta Expedition Team. Half the information was retrieved. Dr. Robinson's notes were mostly intact and carried by.
Bronson's sideward glance made my shoulders slump.
The target girl they met. The immune one without a tongue. She appears to be... dead.
There was a moment of silence, with only distant wind and the aches of metal surrounding us.
If we were aware of any survivors, we would have allocated for them. She is undead, but has shown no hostility. Sear and Varus have both turned. I don't know their current status, but I had to run. I'm currently under the town inside a maintenance tunnel.
Bronson paused. A slow, lingering death was worse than a swift one with direct purpose. He coughed, and inside the congealed blood were thick, fleshy chunks with small larvae wriggling inside the entrails. A trail of it clung to his lips, and I had nothing safe to wipe his mouth with. Leaning on the wall, he stared up at the ceiling, with black mold nestled in the corner. Now a laughable health hazard if he managed to survive.
There are 3 known surviving human megacities. At least, when we set off 6 months ago. One underground somewhere near Tokyo, one in Perth, Australia, and another underground in Detroit.
He chuckled, sputtering on a thickening piece of bloody saliva, thinking of home, and I recognized his accent.
Who would have thought Detroit would have one of the places where people wanted to go? All the empty farmland allowed people a chance to build without the undead lurking around. There were smaller groups, towns that tried to make a last stand, bandits, and trying to maintain law and order has been difficult.
Bronson paused, clutching his stomach, and groaned slowly. His teeth taunt together and winced.
For all I know, they could be gone.
I sat staring, imagining what it could have looked like, crammed with survivors and the constant threat of death approaching.
We were given the RG2A and secondary vaccines. All the soldiers were given them. Round the clock, they were created in a lab for the general population. There wasn't enough for everyone. We had to select who was worthwhile, and who was to be tested on.
Bronson didn't explain what that meant.
If this gets to the right people, we have a chance.
He exhaled, a death rattle creeping up on him, aware that death was approaching. Soon. I didn't know what he wanted, nor how to help the situation.
Now, all I can do is hope she will do this.
He stared at me, his eyes becoming lifeless pools, and soon, Bronson was gone. A wriggling under his skin warned me of what would come. Perhaps it mutated, twisting the undead into something much more terrifying. I slipped the pencil through his temple to prevent any possibility of him rising again. Without a purpose, I sat pondering my next decision. A promise made now felt numb, and perhaps this was the last. A series of monstrous shrieks sounded through the tunnels. He tried to rise, summoned by their call, and instead of following me, he moved towards them, blocking their path. I ran, though hearing him torn and devoured by many mouths on their body. I didn't want to look, yet the sounds, they chilled me to the bone. A low, rumbling laughter echoed through the tunnel, and their rapid footsteps told me they were approaching. The two scientists hobbled toward me with their skulls still cracked open, drawn forward with an instinctive knowing. What struck me was how they feasted on the dead. I saw Lawson's dog tag dangling feebly from the stomach mouth of one of the shambling undead scientists, who draw more of their ordinary kind to them, only to feast on them with cracking bone and mauled flesh. Reaching the ladder to the manhole, I climbed up it. While unable to speak, their hostile eyes down below could be felt. I was angry that even in death, Lawson, Worthington, and the others were harmed. They were the closest thing I had to family, friends, in this twisted, broken world. I ran, sprinting as fast as I could, and stared up at the large structure. After circling the tower, I made my way inside, and searched for a way up. I found stairs used to reach the higher levels of the abandoned building. Finding a maintenance ladder, I climbed up the roof, only to see one of the undead, their legs missing, and practically fused to the concrete. It eyed me up, a shrill cry from down below, and it screamed, desperately reaching out for me. I climbed the high tower, wrapping my stump around it, using my legs to push my body up, and ignoring the feel of my skin peeling off. While there was no pain, the knowing I was being skinned was a terrifying one. All of this in humanity's final hope. I keep my promise to them all. My hand was frozen. It was difficult to move, and gritting my teeth together, I soon realized they were fused. The remnants of my hair stuck together, and my shirt was rotting away from my body, soon falling off, and strips of skin floated away. It beeped. The transmission was working. The upload was successful. 100%. I could barely see now. My eyes were freezing, and my sight was fogging over. Only the metal bars visible, before they were a shadowy memory. It was no longer my concern. All I could do was hope there was someone there to listen and take it all in. I'd send this message to them, and I'd speak for the last time. Frozen yet alive, I remained there, waiting for the day I'd be found, hoping they'd realize my blood is a biohazard. I hope you enjoy this story. What did you think of it? Let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Don't forget to stab the like button, subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreon subscribers, and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Don't forget to check out my social media accounts below, including my merch. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.